Welcome back. Today is February 2nd. And since Ed asked, I was going to skip it today, but Ed insisted, so I will continue on with what happened on this date in history, February 2nd. It was on this date in 1349 that the Black Death peaked, where 200 people a day were dying in London. So that's when we talk about the Black Death and plagues and things like that. In one city alone, London, 200 people a day were dying. In 1536, Pedro de Mendoza founded the city of Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires. Yes, in Argentina, the capital of Argentina. And that's important because Debbie's mom and dad lived there in the area for 10 or 12 years during the time of Eva Perón, which leads to an interesting story about the movie or the musical Evita, but I won't share that now. In 1653, speaking of cities, New Amsterdam became a city. We don't call it New Amsterdam anymore. We call it New York. Became a city on this date in 1653. In 1738, George Whitefield, English evangelist George Whitefield, left England for his first trip to the United States. He would make a total of 8 over the course of his lifetime. Was quite an evangelist at the time, was friends with Jonathan Edwards, and was significant in what is often referred to as the Great Awakening back in the early 1740s. In 1784, Henry Allen died. Henry Allen, it's spelled A-L-L-I-N-E. Henry Allen, often referred to as the Apostle of Nova Scotia. He started as a Congregationalist minister up there, and then veered toward eventually becoming what we would call today a Free Will Baptist, as opposed to a Reformed Baptist or a particular Baptist or just a general Baptist. He would be considered a Free Will Baptist. Henry Allen, famous. He's buried in New Hampshire, I think, although his majority of his career was in Canada. In 1848, today is the date of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is, again, we all remember that one, right? That was the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War. Remember last week, I think it was last week, we talked about the Zimmerman telegram, and the Zimmerman telegram where Mexico was promised that if they got into the war on the part of the Axis powers, that is Germany, they would be given California and New Mexico and Arizona. These are all things that they lost as a result of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo just 50 years previously. So, one of the things is, you realize 1917, the difference between 1917 and 1848 is about the difference between now, today, and say like 1965. How many of you can remember where you were in 1965? Or how many of you remember the 1960s? Okay, vaguely, it's a fog kind of thing, okay. But kind of thing. So they ended up losing 55% of their territory as a result of that. So, yeah, go America. In 1887, today was the first Groundhog Day. I know, it's been around that long, 1887. Is there anybody here who has not seen the movie Groundhog Day? Not seen the movie? It's kind of a cute, yeah, it's a cute, kind of almost a time travel sort of thing. But, pardon me? Yeah, silly, cute thing to watch. In 1901, Protestant missionary Ellen Stone was kidnapped in Turkey. She was released 6 months later when a ransom was raised by her. She was kidnapped by Muslims, Turkish Muslims at the time. She was held for ransom, and her mission board was able to raise $72,000, which translates out to about $2.5 million today. I just say that because in a month, Debbie and I are traveling to Turkey, and I just want to kind of lay the groundwork that if we're kidnapped and they need $2 million, we're counting on you guys, kind of thing. I think we're doomed, dear. I don't know. You know, Ed's got that not one penny look on his face, sort of thing. Today is in 1913. Today is the day that Joyce Kilmer's poem "Trees" was first published. I think that I shall never see a thing as lovely as a tree. You know, what is it? Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. And I think Joyce Kilmer's poem. And finally, it was on this day that what has often been described, 1922, the greatest novel in English was published. Anybody want to guess what that is? I'm guessing very few of us have actually read this book, but it's often considered the greatest novel in the English language. Anybody want to guess? Going once, going twice. Ulysses. How many of you have even heard of Ulysses? Okay, just saying. Okay, but yeah, the book Ulysses. It's got nothing to do with like the Odyssey and Ulysses or anything like that. It's a whole different thing. But that took place on this date in 1922. So today, contrary to rumors that you may have heard, we are in 1 Samuel 25. All right, 1 Samuel 25. By the way, this past week, just so everybody knows, this is something that, proof. You ever heard the expression or seen the meme where a guy will post like he's accomplished something, and it says, it just goes to show that, you don't have to remind me once every 6 months to do something. Eventually I'm going to do it. I did finally, despite being asked like over and over and over again by my wife to check with the church office, and I finally did. And so my every week, you'll notice there's a camera my phone back there filming this, and I go in and I edit it, and I only keep in the finest of the jokes, just so you know. Don't say anything, Ed. This is where I just do my own insulting here. But I kind of post the last week up this week. So this week, if you're watching online, you would see that it's last week's. So if you ever miss a day and want to catch up, you can go to the church website and go to the Sunday School Adult Bible Fellowship thing, and there's the link to the YouTube channel where you can kind of watch it and keep up with it if you want. So, and Debbie has been asking me to do this for quite some time. I think since, I don't know, 2020, something like that. And I finally did it. So there you go. So, all right, 1 Samuel 25. Today we are going to talk about, and I've just titled this session, Abigail. Talk about Abigail. And I'm going to do it a little differently today. First of all, I'm just going to tell you, here's what the story is for those that don't know this. Okay, so David is doing his thing, and there's this guy. He's on the run from Saul. There's a guy named Nabal who's very rich, and he's kind of protecting him, keeping an eye on him, sort of thing, or he's just in an area making sure nobody attacks his stuff. Then it's celebration time, it's sheep shearing time. David sends some guys, says, hey, go see if he can help us out, maintaining us. The guy goes nuts, says, no way. David gets mad. He's going to go attack this area. And after he attacks, on his way, in the meantime, somebody has told the guy's wife, Nabal, Abigail. Abigail grabs some food, runs, interferes, talks David out of it. Abigail goes back, tells her husband dies, and then David marries Abigail. And that's the summary of the story for those of you who have never heard it before. Is there anybody who's not?
Yeah.
Carlos? Thank you. And what's interesting about this particular story, I mean, all the stories in Samuel are interesting, is that you can look at this story from a lot of different perspectives. And we're going to kind of talk about that as we go along. One of the things is, we all have a certain approach to Scripture. Okay, we all have a certain approach to the text, to the Bible, whether you know it or not. You have a framework that you use. And if you grew up in the church, if you grew up in a church like First Baptist, You have a framework that how you look at the Bible, and it's generally based on the incarnation. That the incarnation is the central event of the Bible. It's all about that. Um, Everything's leading to Christ. Everything's following from Christ, kind of thing. You know, if you've ever heard like the Old Testament, just all this points to Christ, kind of thing. If you've ever heard that, that's sort of that framework. Okay. The thing is, within the body of Christ, there are other frameworks. Okay, not everybody looks at the Bible the same way, which is kind of interesting that you can have two people saying the same thing, using the same words, but they're saying two completely different things, depending on what framework they're coming from. And so, if you're familiar with any of these, the most obvious one, or the one that comes to mind most of all, is a view called liberation theology, which started in South America and is more predominant in South America, South and Central America, and among Roman Catholics. But that looks at the Bible with the central event of the Bible being the Exodus. That the Exodus, where God brought the people out of Israel, and that all of the stories in the Bible tend to be a picture of that, a repeat of that. And the incarnation is simply the greatest example of God bringing his people out of bondage. Okay, so everything is about being brought out of bondage. Okay, and so, you know, if you're a liberation theologian, you would look at the Bible and you would say, okay, it's all about bringing people out of bondage, and it tends to be a more socially conscious approach. They say, well, if the Bible is all about, if God's work is all about bringing people out of bondage, then we need to work to bring people out of bondage. So these things matter. Okay, but there's other ways that are sort of loosely related to that, and like, for example, and the one that's today is looking at it from a feminist point of view. Okay, a feminist point of view where you focus on a woman's role in the Bible, considering the fact that the text was written almost certainly by a man in a male-dominated society, and the story is about a man. How do the women play a role? Okay, and so there's these great studies that can be done about the women in the Bible. And I talked about this when we first started, when we first started Samuel. And I said one of the things about Samuel is you look at the story, you see that as the story goes, you see this mess happens, and then a woman steps in and fixes it. Okay, this happens repeatedly through the book of Samuel. You have the priesthood is in a mess at the start of Samuel. The priesthood is in a mess. Eli's getting old. His sons are corrupt. So they need a new priest. What happens? Hannah steps up, sacrifices her son, in the sense, gives up her son to restore the priesthood. We talked about this in chapter 18, that David is on the run from Saul. And in one of the ways of looking at that particular text is to say Michal, the woman that loves Saul, or that loves David, steps in and rescues David, gets David on to the next point. Now today we're going to see another situation where a woman steps in and rescues David. That had it not been for this woman, David would not have been the king that he was. Had it not been for Michal, Saul would have contacted him. Had it not been for Hannah, we wouldn't even have the book. We would be talking about some other book in the Old Testament. I don't know. And we're going to see this as we go through the rest of Samuel, that there are other women that are going to step in and say, there's the woman of Tekoa that's going to say that. That's kind of a foreshadowing, something in the future. Come back again. The witch at Endor is going to step in, and then of course there's the anti-story, and that is Bathsheba, and we'll get to that. But there are some things in today's story where you see there's some foreshadowing of what's going to happen with Bathsheba. Okay, and what's interesting is to me, I'm reading this stuff and I'm looking at this and I'm reading the text and this is really interesting stuff, and never really looked at it from that point of view. Just seeing the central role that this woman has in the text, and I think most men don't see this. Okay, women see it all the time. Okay, for a number of reasons, because you tend to see what you are. It's like if you look for a group photo, if you look at a group photo that you're in, whose picture do you look for first? You look for you. Where am I? Where am I in this picture? Then you look for everyone else. Okay. But then, women go to women's conferences and they talk about women all the time. right? I mean, how many women have been to a women's conference where you said, you know what, let's talk about the men of the Bible? Is that ever? Okay. So but whereas men go to men's conference and men don't go to men's conference, hey, let's talk about the women of the Bible. No, that doesn't happen either. Okay. So today we're focusing on one of the women of the Bible and her central role, that had it not been, but for the role of this woman, we would not be, the Old Testament story wouldn't have happened the way it did. Okay. So this, and it's all in 1 Samuel 25. So Abigail, for all practical purposes, this is the only time you hear from her. I mean, she's mentioned, David had a son and he had a wife and kind of stuff, but for all practical purposes, this is her one and only scene in the Bible. So it's kind of one of those things where you've ever seen a person show up in a movie or in a play. You see it more where they talk about somebody walked in, does a cameo, and steals the scene, and all people remember is that person's role in the movie. Okay, this is kind of, Abigail kind of steps in and does this. Now, it's the story itself is kind of sandwiched between two different events. Okay, we'll start with the first one, and it's your first thing on your handout. Samuel died. What was bound to happen, right? I mean, he was kind of an old guy, and this is where I'm giving myself away, but I think when we get to start talking about the witch at Endor, which is just a couple of chapters away, actually, I'm going to start with the whole spiel from A Christmas Carol. Remember, Marley was dead to begin with. You have to understand that Marley was dead. So Samuel was dead to begin with, and then you have to understand that as you go. But Samuel died. That's it, and that's Samuel died. There's no long death story or lasting blessing or anything like that. Samuel died. Okay. Now, when we left David, he and Saul had made up. Saul had said, "No, I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to do anything like that to you. You're safe. You're safe." Saul went home. David went back to. Does anybody remember? Did David go home? No. He went back to the stronghold. Is what the NIV tells us. He doesn't go back to home because I think David is like, yeah, no. This Saul guy, he's not that stable. So he goes home. But now Samuel has died. This is the guy Samuel had, and one point has looked at it and says that perhaps now that Saul has acknowledged that David is going to be king. Remember, that was just last week. Saul says, "I know that David will be king." Now that Saul has acknowledged David will be king, Samuel's work is done, and he dies. Now, the interesting thing is, and this is just sort of a kind of a placeholder story, Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. All Israel assembled. Okay, the key word there to me was, and this is just speculation on my part, the all part. Does all Israel include David? See, David is on the run. I like to think that there's like this pause in this going battle kind of thing, that all Israel, including David, again, it doesn't, it does say all Israel, right? Gathered to mourn Samuel. So, I mean, is there a big funeral procession? We all just saw Jimmy Carter. Some of us may have watched more of it than others. I met Jimmy Carter once. We all saw Jimmy Carter's funeral and kind of the number of people that were there and all of that. And so you saw that there were, all of the former presidents are lined up next to each other. So is there a funeral like that? Is Samuel lying in state there in the Constitution Hall in Ramah, and are David and Saul sitting next to each other, kind of looking awkward? I don't know. Just kind of an interesting thought. Maybe he doesn't say. I'm just speculating. If you want to say that, because whenever they say all Israel, it doesn't mean every single person. Okay, so certainly everybody mourns them, but it's the gathered, all Israel gathered, because Samuel had been the central guy for 40 years. Okay, so he'd been an important person for 40 years. He had led the country. Remember in chapter 8, against the Philistines. He's the first one we see having tremendous success against the Philistines. He's the one who brought in Saul, and apparently they're not holding that against him. And he's the one who brings in David. Okay, he's the one who has just been God's voice for 40 years, and now he's died. So they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. Okay, it says, so Samuel died, all Israel assembled and mourned him. David too? Yes, no, maybe. I like to think yes. You can disagree with me here. Would it make sense for David? But they're still on this truce kind of thing. Saul did just say, "You're okay, you're going to be king, I know," kind of thing. But it would be sort of, if I were Saul, it would be one of those things where, man, it'd be terrible if an accident happened to David while he's at this funeral. He ends up falling on a sword or something else like that. Okay, I don't know. So it says David moved down to the desert of Paran, Paran. Okay, now what's interesting here is, and if you have a text note, you'll see there's a difference of opinion here. And again, when we talk about the Old Testament, there's two main sources that we keep going back and forth to. Okay, there's the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and there's the Masoretic text, which is the complete Hebrew text of the Old Testament Bible. Okay, now you would think, all other things being equal in the world of textual criticism, that the Hebrew would take precedence over the Greek, because the Greek is clearly a translation. The problem is that the Septuagint is from about 200 BC, whereas the Masoretic text is from about 800 AD. Okay, so it's like, well, what happened to the Hebrew text? Well, that's a good question. So you have these two different texts, and they differ here as far as what it says. So the Septuagint, which is the older text, says that David goes to the town of Maon, M-A-O-N. Okay, but the Masoretic text says he goes to Paran, P-A-R-A-N. Now, these are two different places. Okay, Maon is further south, Paran is further north. So why? And so there's not it's not a chance where one says he went to Chicago and the other one says he went to the Windy City. It's not like that. Okay, it's like one says he went to Chicago, the other says he went to Indianapolis. Okay, these are two different places. So why the difference? Well, for one thing, there isn't a geo tracker on David to begin with, right? So we can't just go back into the website and see where he tracked. All right. One idea is that it was changed in the Masoretic text, because remember I talked about when David first went into this, I said some look at this and say this is David's time in the wilderness, which if you look at this story of David and you see what he's doing, and you see David in the wilderness and he's being brought out of the wilderness, you're kind of looking at it like a Exodus story, liberation theologian would. Okay, doesn't make it wrong, I'm just saying. Okay, so again, it's a different way, and if you go to a Bible professor, especially, or a pastor or someone, they're, oh no, this is Nick. But just different ways of sometimes when you look at it from another perspective, you see things that you might not have seen if you're stuck, where if you ever had a situation where you're looking at something and you're looking at something and you're looking at something, and you're done, you've gotten all there is out of it, and then you give it to your spouse, and your spouse looks at it and asks the one thing that you completely missed. Has that ever happened to you? Yeah, that's what I call it. That only happens to me on days that end in Y around my house, kind of thing. When I first met Debbie, we met, and it was love at first sight for me. It was, she took a little longer, but again, this is the male perspective. So if you want the female perspective, you have to go to a women's conference. But we met, and we'd gone out a couple of times, and as far as I knew, I had confessed every sin of my youth. everything I'd ever done wrong in my life. It was a long conversation. There was a lot to go over. I had a list, kind of, you pull out the scroll kind of thing. So then we're going to go over to my dad's house. We're going to go over to my parents' house. And this is where they're going to meet my girlfriend. And so I walk in the door. I say to, hey, Dad, this is Debbie. And, oh, glad to meet you. And Debbie says something. This is how I remember the conversation going. And Debbie says, oh, yes, he's told me so much about you and growing up here. And my dad asked the one question. Did he show you where he tried to burn down my house? I forgot a story. And Debbie's like, no, show me. And yeah. And to this day, she doesn't allow me to hold matches in the house. Yes, I did. It seemed like a really good idea at the time. But sometimes you see things. And so some have suggested that the town was changed to Paran to better illustrate, to better put David in that Exodus viewpoint. Because Paran is a place that the children of Israel spent some time at. It's where Hagar was cast out in Genesis. So it better fits in with the bigger picture of Israel. Okay. The problem is the next line in verse 2, when we start talking about Nabal, we're back in Maon again, M-A-O-N. So it's kind of like this. I'm just explaining why. It could be both. It could be Paran. I mean, it couldn't be both. I mean, he could have gone to Paran and it just was a mistake. Somebody somewhere made a decision. And this is kind of a recurring theme that I talk about. Even when you look at your English Bible, when you're looking at an English Bible, somebody somewhere made a decision, okay, an interpretive decision about what you're going to see in the text that you're looking at. Just so you know. This is one of the reasons why you want to have different translations. Kind of look around and see, significantly different translations. So, like the King James and the New King James, not, that's the same textual basis. So, the NIV or the New American Standard or even the New Revised Standard to kind of get an idea of different approaches to it. So David moves to the desert of Paran, or maybe it's the town of Maon. Okay. Now in the town of Maon, there's a man. Now it's interesting as we're going to introduce this man. Okay, he's not named. So the characteristic, what do you know about this man if we stop? Okay, so what do we know about this man? A certain man in Maon who had property there, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. We don't even know the guy's name yet, but we're focusing on this guy is loaded. Okay? I mean, 1,000, that's a lot of sheep. Okay? He's got 1,000 sheep. He's got 3,000 goats. I'm sorry, he had 1,000 goats and 3,000, that's even more sheep. He had 3,000 sheep. That's a lot of animals. And at this time period, it's certainly in the Old Testament era, you measured a person's wealth by what they owned. They had a lot of property, not necessarily property, but flocks, sheep, because land ownership was not quite as clear as it is today. Okay, but he had a lot of. This guy's wealthy. He is loaded. He has huge flocks of sheep. Okay, his name was Nabal. Okay, now we find out his name. Okay, so in the town of Maon, there's a man who's very rich with property, 3,000 goats and 1,000 sheep. That's a lot of wealth. Okay, this guy is loaded. Okay, his name, Nabal. Okay, his name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings, which is exactly how people describe Debbie and I. An intelligent and beautiful woman. Well, okay. But her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. An interesting little thing. This is Caleb, as in Joshua and Caleb, okay, from Judah. Okay, so he's a Judahite, okay, member of the tribe of Judah. David is of the tribe of Judah, okay. So they're related. It's a question of how distant they're related, but I mean, it could be just like a distant cousin, okay. It's like, this is one of his clansmen. David is one of Nabal's clansmen. Nabal is one of David's clansmen. Okay, they're the same people group. Okay, they're like, this is their primary corporate identity, is they are of the tribe of Judah. They are, okay. Let's see. He has a wife, Abigail, who is intelligent and beautiful. Nabal, on the other hand, is a surly and mean and a Calebite. Okay, from descendant of Caleb. If you go back to, I think it's First Chronicles 2, talks about how his, he descended from Caleb, uh, from Judah. Okay, so here we are in this area. You've got this very rich guy, very rich Judahite, living and shearing his sheep in the same area that David and his men, his group of 600 men that are there wandering around in the desert. And David sends a message to Nabal. Okay, while David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. Okay, this is like the harvest. This is like the sheep harvest, right? This is when you're going to get all the wool. That's a lot of sheep. Okay, that's a lot of work. That's there's a lot of wealth. This is kind of like, this is when he's cashing in, right? So he sent 10 young men and send them up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Okay, because by this everybody knows David, right? I mean, David has killed his, or Saul has killed his thousands. David has killed his tens of thousands. Okay, David is the son-in-law of the king. Everybody knows David, right? At this point, he is certainly a celebrity. If not, he's a celebrity on the run. Don't get me wrong, but he's still, everybody knows who David is, right? You'd think, right? I mean, he's on all the websites. Okay, but everybody knows that. Go greet him in my name. That David is from Judah. Okay, and he sends 10 young men. Okay, so what I find interesting is that what does he expect? How much stuff does he expect to get? Well, he sent 10 young men to carry it back. So that kind of gives you an idea of what he's expecting to get back. Okay, David sends a message to Nabal, which, and I'm going to go with this point of view, to David is a reasonable request. Now, this is one of those points where you can diverge. Okay, there are some commentators, okay, that Brueggemann is one of them, who looks at this and says David is extorting Nabal. Okay, it's a shakedown. He's going, hey, I'm David, give me. Okay, and some commentators look at that, and I was of that opinion until I started really thinking about him being a Calebite, and he's being of the tribe of Judah. And I think, David, so the point, let me read the point of what he asks. He says, where am I here? Greet him in my name, say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. So he starts, long life to you, a blessing from David. Okay, now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. Okay. Now, to David, this is a very reasonable request. Long life. My men and I were in the vicinity of your flocks, and we didn't mistreat them. We didn't take anything. Ask your servants, they will back me up. Your servants will tell you that this is how it was. Be favorable to us. This is the big ask. Okay, so he sends 10 young men down there. Now, some have pointed out that, well, he's just, he's wanting to be rewarded for not doing anything bad. Not, he could have harassed the people then, but he didn't. So, I mean, if you look at David as being kind of like extorting, then you go, well, what's the big deal? You just didn't do anything bad, so we're supposed to reward you? Okay? You ever have your child come up to you and say, hey, guess what? I didn't do anything bad today. Can I have a prize? Wait a minute. That's kind of like the lowest bar of, I don't know. Some of us look at now we've kind of gotten used to having a low bar. When we read the newspaper, we say, okay, no excitement out of Washington today. That's good. Let's thank the Lord for that. Right? So we've got a very low bar. But I'm just saying that's kind of a low bar. But the more I thought about it, and again, this is kind of my opinion on this, and you can differ with me, because again, there's Bible scholars, again, Walter Brueggemann is one of them, who's just like, this is David shaking him down. No question about it. He's extorting him. Okay? But I think that this is just, David is operating out of a social convention, that he's a warrior, he's got men, he's protecting his tribesmen, his clansmen's stuff. Okay, it's just one of these social conventions. Okay, sort of like if I were to, let's say you go to the local Barnes and Noble, the one at the promenade. I don't know if there's a closer one. So you go to the local Barnes and Noble and you're looking through the books there, and you look up and you see me or Debbie, because I'm the surly and mean one. She's the intelligent, beautiful one. You know, there's sort of a social convention that, and if you were to see me in Barnes and Noble and I were to see you and do this and race out the door, you'd be a little, what's with him? Right? I mean, would it kill you to say hi? You know, I mean, then of course you do get to that whole, when you see somebody in a different spot, you know, it's like when you see somebody you usually see in a uniform, but then you see them in McDonald's and it takes you a while to realize, who are you? No, it's not that. You recognize. And I just walk away. You think, well, wait a minute. Why couldn't you just acknowledge, you know, that's just sort of a social convention we have. You see somebody you know, you don't have to have a long conversation. You don't have to sit down and go out to dinner and all, but I'm willing if you want, you know, especially if you're buying. I'm just saying, I'm always up for a free meal. But it's just sort of a social convention. And I think David, my opinion is that this is what David is doing. And the return to that is that Nabal, being a very rich man, would be more than willing to support others from his tribe. So to David, it's a very reasonable request. Yes.
I always thought of it as implying that if David hadn't been there, he probably would have lost sheep and goats, and like it was just like an occupational hazard. Like he expects to lose some because he's got so many, and you know what I mean? Like that's the way I saw it. Like,
so you're saying that David, or the point is that had David not been there, he would have lost some, and he's pointing that out. Well, that's going to come up later, that idea later, because David doesn't say anything here to that effect. I'm just looking at what David says here to him. Okay, so this is just to David's request. Okay, so David's men, so when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. You all know that. You ever do the big ask? Debbie, will you marry me? Let me think about this here. What do you got? I mean, I'm intelligent and beautiful, and you're surly and mean. What's in this for me? No, I'm just kidding. That is not how it went, but if you go to a women's conference, you'll find out her version. I'm kidding. That's not. But they're waiting. Okay, so it's awkward. Like, so how's it going? You know, I don't know. Are they standing there with the servants? I think there are servants of Nabal in the vicinity. We know that. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So David's men give the message, and then they waited. And to me, it's kind of funny, actually. To me, it's sort of funny. But then Nabal answered David's servants. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Okay. Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? Let's just say Nabal rejects the request. And in the process, he insults David. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Yeah. Yeah. And he knows who David is. How do we know he knows who David is? Well, one, because David is famous. So who is this son of Jesse? Well, wait a minute. If you don't know who he is, how do you know he's the son of Jesse? Okay. So, I mean, Nabal knows who this guy is. Nabal is just surly and mean and is like, hey, I'm not going to do anything for you. Forget about it. Okay. Take a hike. Hit the road. Not a chance. Adios. Get out of here. You know, I don't owe you anything. Right? He rejects the request and sends the men on his way. Okay. David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word David said to each man, each of you strap on your sword. Now David understands that, okay, Nabal has broken this social norm. Nabal has insulted him, and he still has 600 hungry men, right? When they could have been taken care of. So he says, strap on your sword. So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. Okay, notice, side note, just note this, how David splits up his men. Okay, at this point, he looks at his 600 and says, you 200 stay, you 400 come with me. Okay, now keep this in mind because this is going to come back in a later story. Side note, okay? Back to the main story, kind of thing. So they did, and David strapped on his sword, 200 stayed. One of the servants, verse 14, told Abigail, Nabal's wife. So there's one servant there who says, uh-oh, this isn't good. Now keep in mind, what is David known for doing? Killing people, winning battles. Okay? This is like standing in front of a heavily armed guy wanting your wallet, going, no, I'm not giving you my wallet. Who do you think you are? Right? How many of you would do that? Some might. I'm like, here's my wallet, here's my shoes, whatever you want, you can have it. Right? Some of the servants have the sense to realize, hey, this may not be the best way to handle this situation. So one of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Now this isn't a surprise to Abigail, because her husband is surly and mean. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. And then getting back to what Karen said, night and day they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Okay. Now David's request doesn't make a point that they were protecting them. But he does say, ask your servants. Now here's the servant saying, they protected us. Okay. So they did, Nabal is richer today than he would have been had it not been for David's people. Okay. So really I think that's all David wants is, or enough that 10 people can carry, 10 young men can carry. Okay. Night and day. Now, verse 17. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Okay, so we're going to be doing a husband and wife discussion here on how to deal with your husband, and we're going to use this example. No, I'm just kidding. Not exactly the biblical model of marriage here, okay? No one could talk to this guy. And as it turns out, neither does Abigail. Abigail just takes things into her own hands. It says, let me see. Nabal rejects the request. In the process, he insults David. David's response is to saddle up and go kill every male. Oh, wait, we haven't got to that point yet. Well, servant manages to get to Abigail before it's too late. The servant repeats everything David's men had said, with the addition that they had provided protection. They were a wall for Nabal's flocks. Per the servant, disaster is hanging over them. I guess I'm missing a word there. Abigail acted quickly, but she does not tell her husband. One of the servants, verse 18, Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So next time you're in a session where somebody is telling you how husbands and wives need to communicate, and you need to tell your husband everything, you kind of go back, wait a minute, what about Abigail? Okay, Abigail, she doesn't tell her husband.
For his own good.
Yeah, well, see what we'll find out what happens when she does finally tell him. But so she goes. All right. Abigail acted quickly. She brings a lot of food. Okay, that's a lot of food, but not really enough to feed 600 men. Okay, I mean, I don't know how much she was expecting to get. She loads it on donkeys. I don't know how many people she had, But really, this was not like going to feed 600 men. Okay, and at this point, I'm guessing their families are along as well. So you have 200 loaves of bread. Okay, well that's great. That's one for every three, and so again, it's a couple days. It's good. It's a big pile of food, and being the wife and not, it's impressive what she gets together. But I just want to make sure that this is not going to like feed David for the rest of the year. Okay, so she brings a lot of food, but not really enough. And now David is traveling in. Okay, as she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her. So she and her are coming up. David's coming down. Okay, um, and his men descending toward her, and she met them. Okay, now previously David had been fuming. He is not happy here. Okay, David had just said, "It's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing." So now David is saying, "Yeah, we did. We actively watched over this guy's stuff. It's been useless all my watching, so nothing of his. He has paid me back evil for good." And so now David is going to go. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belongs to him. Okay, so David is literally seeing blood. Okay, it's basically, I mean, I don't know if it's, yeah, but if you get into, and if you have a King James, and I don't know how the New King James translates it, but it's basically anyone who stands up to relieve themselves is going to be killed.
What verse?
In verse 22. Okay, he's going to kill every male there. He has blood in his eyes. Okay, overreaction. You tell me. Again, what do you think of David? This is how your perspective goes. If you look at David and you say, well, this is a story. If you're focusing only on David, man after God's own heart, if you take this very high view of David, then this is. If you kind of look, and I think they're being a little more realistic. The writer is being a little more realistic. That David was a good king, the best king. He still had a lot of flaws, of which Bathsheba was just one. Okay, so David is seeing blood. Okay, so he's taken his 400 men, all armed. They're going to go in there and they are going to wipe out Nabal. They're going to take all of his. This is his goal. He's going to walk out of there with 1,000 sheep, 1,000 goats, 3,000 sheep, and a whole lot of wool because it's sheep shearing time. Okay, he's going to do very well. That's his plan, because that's what David does. Okay, that's what he's known for doing. And then he makes this oath: "May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alone male of all who belong to him." So he takes an oath, kind of like Saul. Remember we were talking about Saul making these crazy oaths? Now here's David. Now his is a little more vague. Good for David, right? He doesn't say something, "May I die if I don't accomplish this," because we all know he's not going to accomplish this. Okay, and now he's fuming. I'm going to wipe out this family. I am going to wipe out every male, every father, every son, every uncle, every brother, every man in this thing. I am going to kill. We've all got our swords, and oh look, there's the wife. Oops. How's it going, David? Right? When Abigail saw David, now this is the first time they've met. Okay, she's never met David, as far as we know. Maybe they have. Okay, but this is their first meeting. She quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. Which is it's like David's, let's see, where am I? Abigail quickly. She brings a lot of food. David fumes that Nabal paid me back evil for good. Which kind of brings things back to Joseph. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. There's other times that phrase comes up. Abigail meets up with David in compare Genesis 33. This is where Jacob meets up with Esau. Jacob gets on and bows. When David comes out of the cave and meets Saul, what does he do? He bows down. Okay, Abigail bows down right away. And she begins in this position, because no indication now, she's bowed the whole time. She's like, I'd illustrate it, but then I would go out of the camera focus, and that would be bad. We don't want to do that. But she's like on her knees, head down, and she's about to give the longest speech of a woman in the Old Testament. Okay, longest uninterrupted speech. I know the women in the room are going, wait, an uninterrupted speech by a woman without a man interrupting? Yeah, that's exactly what happens here, right? So it's interesting what Abigail says. Okay, so she's there, and remember, the food is in front of her. So David has already seen the food. It's kind of like with Jacob and Esau. If you remember that story, Jacob sends all of the gifts and all of this wealth ahead of him. Then Jacob comes in the back. This is the same thing. The food goes first. The servants go first. Then Abigail's in the back because she says, you go ahead of me. Now Abigail, she gets off. She kneels down. Maybe David is going, whose stuff is this? Whose is this? Whose is this? Oh, this is Abigail's. Oh, Abigail, where is she? Where is she? There she is. She gets out, she kneels down, and she starts talking. Pardon your servant, my Lord. Okay. Now, she gives the longest. She asks forgiveness for her intruding. Sorry, I know you're busy. I know you got things to do, i.e., kill my husband. But hey, excuse me for interrupting here. Okay. Pardon your servant, my Lord. Now, it's interesting. Notice how many times she says in this text, how many times she says, my Lord. Okay. So I'll just read the whole speech. She says, pardon your servant, my Lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. Okay. Now, this is a wife talking about her husband. Okay. Lessons, how all the wives in the room pay. Maybe we should go up to the young married couple and we talk about this. Here's how you talk about your husband. Pay no attention to that guy. His name means fool, and that's what he is. That's what she says, right? Okay. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my Lord sent. Nobody talked to me. I only found out after the fact. Okay. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal, and let this gift which your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the men who follow you. Okay. Let me start early. I'll just go on. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battle, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled my Lord for every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. Okay. She says several things here. Okay. She asks forgiveness for her intruding. Pay no attention to my husband, he's a fool. That's what her name means. His name means. Her name means like my father's joy, or the joy of my father. I did not see the men. She praises God that David hasn't killed anyone over this. Right? Oh, it's a good thing you haven't killed anybody over this. Well, it sure is a great thing that nothing that crazy has happened. She offers her gift for the men who follow her. Okay, let me just do this first half, okay? Again, I did not see the Lord. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed. Okay? Oh, yeah, you haven't killed anybody over this. You wouldn't do this, right? And then in verse 28, what's interesting about this is she's acting in a prophetic role here. Okay, she says, please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles. So she's correcting him. So, you're finding this, and the unasked question here is like, is this the Lord's battle you're gearing up for here? I'm kind of wondering if this is one of those kind of deals where, David is kind of doing the whole standing there. kind of, you know, even though some, because you fight the Lord's battle, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Okay? The suggestion here is that, if you do this isn't going to look well on your resume. Okay? Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life. Who? Who is pursuing David? Saul. Okay? The life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. You're safe. The Lord is going to protect you. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, I say, but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. Interesting way to, would that resonate with David at all? It's going to be like in a sling. I'm going to cast away like a sling. Do you know anything about slings, David? Ever have any experience with slings? Okay, does this ring a bell with you, David? This is what the Lord is going to do to your enemies, of whom clearly Nabal is one of his enemies. Okay? When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning thing, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed. So I think is a really interesting phrase. Okay, so you notice she doesn't walk in and say, "Hey, don't kill my husband." She's just accepting that everything is fine and that David is just out for a walk, and that's all. And she said, "Oh, it's so good you haven't killed anybody because it really isn't going to look good. And if you kill somebody, man, that would be the staggering burden of needless bloodshed and how that's going to ruin your kingdom." Well, that's great because foreshadow much here, because what happens after David needlessly kills Uriah? What happens to his kingdom? Okay, the staggering burden of needless bloodshed. If he would have listened to Abigail, if he would have just listened to the woman, things would have been so much better. Okay? My Lord will not have. And when the Lord your God has, so staggering burden, or of having avenged himself. It's okay to go out and avenge the Lord. It's okay to fight the Lord's battle. But like David, is this the Lord's battle? Did Nabal insult the Lord or did Nabal insult you? Okay. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. Okay. She knows that God will protect David. She knows David's enemies will be thrown away as if, I'm on page 2, in a sling. She knows that David will be king. At this point, this is the worst kept secret in Israel, I think. She hopes that David won't have the staggering burden of needless bloodshed. Finally, she says, when you have reached all that, remember me. Remember your servant. Okay? So this is kind of interesting. Now there's another way to look at it. What is Abigail saying here? Okay? She's coming up to David. She's saying, God is going to take care of all your enemies. And the unspoken thing is, Nabal has made it pretty clear that you're not his friend, that you're his enemy. God is going to take care of Nabal. Let God take care of Nabal. Okay? And when that happens, remember me, the intelligent and beautiful woman. Okay? It's interesting. For what it's worth, I'm going to skip down here. For what it's worth, she says my Lord 11 times. And what's interesting is that can also be translated as often used for my husband. So what's,
That's what Debbie calls you, Lord.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You have to get the right sneer in the voice when she says, my Lord, kind of thing. But, So so David says, and I'm just going to kind of jump here real quick because we're running out of time. David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. Okay, now let's make it clear, and I'm going to end with this point because it's 5 after. So just so we're clear here on what's happened. in this story in the Old Testament. Okay, based on what David said, the Lord sent you to stop me from doing this. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, so we're clear. A woman is commissioned by God and sent by God to deliver a message to a man that was needed. Okay, and it turned out to be effective. Okay, so again, just, if you're ever in a situation where say, the women just, if the women would just be quiet, things would be great. Okay, that's come up a little bit recently due to a certain sermon that was preached by a female in the presence of a certain president, kind of thing. But this is a great example where you can't get around it. David says it. God sent you, a woman, to set me straight. Okay. So again, we tend to, if you focus on, and this is why I'm like, wow, this Abigail, wow, this one is, and this is her only, and again, I'm running out of time here, so I'll finish this discussion next week. But I mean, she's, one of the great ones. Because David is armed. There's nothing, if he's mad enough, he's going to kill her too. Yeah, you're just the wife. But she's able to convince him not to do that. Okay. So I think, sometimes, I think one quick lesson we can take from that is that, God will use all of us. Okay. You don't necessarily have to be intelligent and beautiful. Okay. I mean, it's helped Debbie her whole life. I know. Okay. Whereas being surly and mean has not done a whole lot for me. But although Nabal was rich, so again, there is that, surly and mean, he's very rich. Hey, but God uses everyone in his kingdom to deliver. It's not just, there isn't like God can only use this group of people or that group of people. God uses someone. And I think Abigail is very intelligent. She's like, okay, because she's going to go back. She's going to go back. David's going to change his mind. He's going to say, okay, you're right. I don't want to do this. If only Abigail had stepped in, around the Bathsheba time and said, you don't want to do this, kind of thing. The story ends, well, I'll just leave it at that. We'll get back to it because I can get back on this hobby horse next week. Any questions?
What version are you using?
NIV. NIV. The updated NIV, the 2011 NIV. Any questions? All right. See you guys next week for the rest of the Abigail story.
Shout out.